Mono green is one of my favorite archetypes in Magic the Gathering within the Commander format. It is one of the first archetypes that I originally picked up as a new player myself, and so in the year 2025, we're going to see how busted we can make a mono green Commander deck. And of course, we're in the big Stompy archetype led by Goreclaw, Terror of Qal Sisma, 4-mana 4/3 bear. Creature spells you cast with a power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast, and whenever it attacks, each creature we control power 4 or greater gets ++1 and trample until end of turn. Goreclaw is a classic commander for mono green Stompy, and this thing provides a massive discount to your mana curve, which I'll actually show the math behind in just a moment. Of course, my name is Nathan, you're watching the Solid Productions YouTube channel. If you want to leave a like on this video because you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate it very much, and if you want to stay tuned for more deck techs like this one, you can subscribe to me to stay up to date, and of course check out my Patreon in the link down below. Now, when we talk about what Goreclaw is actually doing for us in the command zone, we have to delve into a little bit of mana curve math here, and so I have Moxfield pulled up in a separate tab to go over the average mana cost with Goreclaw on the field and without. So without, we're running at about a 3.67 average mana curve. You can see what that looks like here within Moxfield, and once we have Goreclaw out, this shrinks all the way down to 2.82, so almost a whole point off of our average mana cost, and I'll have a little animation on screen that shows that play out from before to after. However, this amount of mana discounting does come at a cost because we must commit very heavily to the board. So this particular build of Goreclaw is built very heavily around board wipe mitigation. In other words, generating lots of card advantage and resources when our big Stompy creatures enter, and we also want to be able to protect Goreclaw, and if Goreclaw is not on the battlefield, we want to be able to continue to cheat creatures out with big creature cheat spells as well. I've played Goreclaw for a couple of years, and a lot of decks don't focus enough on the card advantage piece, because once we actually get board wiped, we want to be able to recover very quickly and have a full hand to play from. So let's delve into the most fun aspect of the deck, which is creature cheat. Starting with Emergent Woodworm, which is a 7-mana 4/4. Backup 3 means it puts 3 1/1 counters on a creature, and then it can gain the following ability. When this creature attacks, look at the top X cards of your library where X is this power. We can cheat out a permanent card with mana value X or less onto the battlefield, and the rest go on the bottom in a random order. This is great because it's going to be providing a lot of card and mana advantage at the same time, and with Goreclaw's discount, this is 5 mana. So this is a great natural curve-in if we were to play Goreclaw, then play another land, and then we could play an Emergent Woodworm and swing with Goreclaw immediately. Evercoat Ursine will allow us to basically play a free creature spell. If we look at the top 3 cards of our library, one of them gets exiled face down, and then we do this twice, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we can play one of those without paying its cost. So Evercoat Ursine, another great creature cheat effect. Ghalta is the perfect spell to slam. Honestly, there is no better card probably in this deck than Ghalta Stampede Tyrant. When it ETBs, you just put all your creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. This is absolutely amazing if we have something like a Vaultborn Tyrant already on the battlefield, because you slam all of your creatures and then you draw that many cards. So just absolutely ridiculous top end there with Ghalta Stampede Tyrant, just the best card in the deck, frankly. Then we have Kodama of the East Tree, which is a great source of mana advantage by allowing us to cheat out a permanent onto the battlefield. O'Hare Castellan would do the same thing if it connects with a trample 6/5 body. Reveal from the top, you may put a creature and or land card onto the battlefield, and it dies into a land, so very resilient god here. Then we have See the Unwritten. This does not get discounted by Goreclaw, but its effect is good enough that we run it anyway. For 6 mana sorcery, reveal the top 8. You may put a creature from among them onto the battlefield, and if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we can do it again. Selvala Stampede. This is generally a tome of text, but I'm going to simplify it. Generally, you will always vote for wild, and your opponents will vote for free, which means that you dig from the top of your library until you hit a creature, and that goes onto the battlefield, and then for 3 free votes, you get to put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So just a crazy source of mana advantage with Selvala Stampede, one of my favorite spells in the entire Commander format. Smuggler's Surprise, I generally consider this to be about 3 mana, because on the base level casting of the spell is a 3 mana instant. The first line there says, mill 4 cards and may put up to 2 creature and or land cards from the mill cards into your hand, and we are running majority creature and land cards, so there's a very high possibility to hit off of 4 cards. Then there's a secondary mode. We can pay 5 to put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, and then it has a backup Savior mode with 2 mana, creatures you control power 4 or greater with hexproof, gain a hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And if we take it all together, you could also cast this for the 3 plus the 5. So the first 2 modes would be 8 mana to both draw and to cheat creatures into play, an absolute crazy top end effect. And the fact that this comes with a backup mode to save your creatures is insane. Woodland Bellower can grab a creature non-legendary from our library and put it onto the battlefield. Now, if we take a look at which cards we can actually access with that, Jitter's Patron will draw us 2 cards. Outcaster Trailblazer will also draw us cards. Scrap Shooter can destroy our opponent's artifacts and enchantments. And then Spinner of Souls will help us recover from a board wipe. And if we need ramp, we can access Topiary Stomper as well to ramp out a basic onto the battlefield. Now, that does conclude our creature cheat category. However, friends, there are more big stompies to cover, and we are going to discuss the rest of our big fatties that will be generating us resources in other ways. Defiler of Vigor is a 5-mana 6/6 trampler body. It turns one of our green pips into a Phyrexian mana, so all of our spells cost 1 less to cast effectively, and then it does pump our creatures whenever we cast a green permanent spell. Absolutely insane value in Defiler of Vigor. Hulking Raptor will add 2 green at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, so a nice little ramping effect here on a 5/3 Ward 2 body. Nylea Keen-Eyed is 4-mana 5/6 indestructible body that discounts our creature spells by 1, and this is a creature enchantment on the stack, so this does get discounted by Goreclaw. Then we have Old Gnawbone, one of the craziest finishers on the top end of our deck. 7/7 flyer in green, I might add. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. This card itself will completely power your end game. If this thing stays on the battlefield for more than 1 turn, you are in Value Town. Now, for our draw category, we have Elder Gargaroth, which will, whenever it attacks or blocks, we will probably mostly be drawing a card, but we can also create a 3/3 green beast creature token on a 6/6 Vigilance Reach Trample body. Not bad. Garruk's Pack Leader, 5-mana 4/4 beast. Whenever another creature you control power 3 or greater enters, you may draw a card. Keeper of Fables is a 5-mana 4/5 creature cat. Whenever one or more non-human creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card, of which we are not running any humans. Then we have, I also want to cover here really quick because I realize Vaultborn Tyrant is also in this category. 7-mana 6/6 trample. Whenever in another creature with power 4 or greater ETBs, you gain 3, draw 3. So I love little instant to life gain in my deck. I'm a big fan of, packing a couple of instant life gain effects so that you at least are not the first to die to the burn player at the table. And then we also have our cheap fatty bodies. So Ghalta Primal Hunger does nothing more than be a 2-mana 12/12 trample body, which is super fun to slam onto the battlefield and is always a threat. Primeval Protector, same thing, but it will cost basically 1 mana, and it will enter and put a 1/1 counter on each other creature we control, which is awesome. Now, some people might be, confused. Oh, this doesn't have trample or anything. Well, note that with Goreclaw's second ability, when it attacks, we do give our creatures +1/+1 and trample. So if Goreclaw is attacking with Primeval Protector, this becomes an 11/11 trample for only 1 mana, which is absolutely crazy. Okay, let's go back to our early game here. How are we actually going to get to cast Goreclaw and all of these big fatty spells? Well, Archdruid's Charm is simply one of the best green spells ever printed. For only 3 mana at instant speed, choose one, tutor up a creature or land card, put it on the battlefield tapped if it's a land, otherwise it goes into your hand, or we can put a ++1 counter on target creature and have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, or we can get rid of an artifact or enchantment, which is just insane because this, you can always hold this up to remove your opponent's thing. Most often, and this is why it's in the ramp category, we will probably use this to grab something like an Ancient Tomb, or perhaps if you're in the late game, you can use it to grab a Temple of the False God to eliminate the life loss effect there. But this is going to be a 3-mana ramp 2 at bare minimum, and it has upside with the other modes as well. Broken Bond is going to combine both removal and ramping by being a 2-mana sorcery, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and we can put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. Burgeoning allows us to play extra lands, possibly up to 3 a turn cycle. Absolutely insane. And we do run a lot of card draw to keep this fueled. I've been more and more turning to these types of 1-mana effects. Both Burgeoning and Exploration are in this deck because not only are they 1 mana, which is cheaper than a typical, 2-mana Nature's Lore, but it also will just potentially allow us to ramp out more lands every turn, and it is an enchantment, so it's very hard to get rid of for some colors. We also have an Emerald Medallion because we're in mono green. Exploration we already talked about. Fanatic of Ronus is just the best mana dork in the Commander format. It will basically always add 4 mana for us for only costing 2, just a patently insane rate with Fanatic of Ronus. And then we have a Flare of Cultivation. Now I just want to talk a little bit about why a 3 mana spell is being run in a mono green commander deck whose commander costs 4 mana. A lot of people think that the standard way to play it would be you play your turn 2 3 visits so that you ramp into 4 mana on turn 3, so then you can cast Goreclaw. I personally don't think that matters a lot because once again we are already anticipating that we are going to be board wiped on turn 5 or turn 6, and we don't want to necessarily be the first one to have their big beefy commander on the battlefield. That is how Goreclaw often becomes a magnet for removal, so instead I'd rather just run a normal 3 mana, what is essentially a Kodama's Reach. I don't anticipating us sacking our creature to cast this for free, in order to get that extra land into our hand so that we can continue to play lands into the late game and sort of anticipate the mid and late game instead of immediately running out our commander and having it killed right away. Topiary Stomper is going to be a great ramp spell. Again, it does cost 3 mana, so it's not on curve in quotes, but it does synergize with our commander by being a 4/4 vigilance body. Then we have Traverse the Outlands, which will simply win you the game if the spell resolves. 5 mana sorcery, search library for up to X basic land cards where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Those go onto the battlefield tapped. We are running 16 forests, so we should have enough to cover a resolution of Traverse the Outlands, but I have encountered not running enough basics for the spell before, so just know that this will put you like 15 mana ahead in some cases. Utopia Sprawl, 1 mana ramp spell and Wild Growth as well. There's really nothing much else to say for these spells other than that they are very efficient and can definitely go into a mono green deck. Then we'll cover our card draw category here, starting us off with Compost. This is a 2-mana enchantment. Whenever a black card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may draw a card, and this will cover all of your self-mill spells, all of your graveyard aristocrat shenanigans, and instants and sorceries. So simply, if there's a black deck at the table, Compost is going to draw you a ton of cards. Garruk's Uprising will draw us a card whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters and gives our creatures trample, which is pretty great. Generous Patron will basically be a draw 2 for 3 mana, so kind of a divination in green, but it's good enough where I actually like to run this, and you also get just a little bit of political favor as well. Greater Good is a 4 mana enchantment where we can sack a creature at instant speed to draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 cards. My one warning with Greater Good is that it will make your turns take like 20 minutes because I've ran into the situation a few times where I have like 5-ish 5/5 sitting on the battlefield and an opponent casts a board wipe because otherwise they would die, and so now we have to resolve all 5 sack triggers in order where we have to draw 5, then you have to look and decide what are your 3 weakest cards. Those go into the graveyard, and then we do that like 5 more times. So just be ready to resolve a bunch of Greater Good sacrifices quickly because it can drag out and make your turns take forever whenever a creature you control is going to be removed. Outcaster Trailblazer is an incredibly cheap creature from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. When it ETBs, add 1 mana of any color, and whenever another creature with power 4 or greater ETBs, we draw a card, and it can be plotted, which is very nice, and I like that. I like paying its plot cost right away in the early game. If Goreclaw is not already out, obviously, then it would just cost 1 mana, but by plotting this on turn 2 or turn 3, we can then save it for when we actually have a creature ready to be put on the battlefield and will potentially propel us forward with that extra 1 free mana. Pygmy Kavu will ETB and draw a card for each black creature your opponents control. Now, this is not necessarily a meta draw spell, but I've noticed that decks that are black in their color identity can at times give you the most amount of headache as a mono green player between removing your stuff, forcing you to sack creatures and so forth, or maybe discard cards. So I like to include anti-black tech in my card draw slot with Pygmy Kavu, which is really in place of something like a Harmonize or just a generic card draw spell. Rishkar's Expertise will draw a bunch of cards and allow us to slam a mana value 5 or less spell, which is pretty great. The Great Henge will most often, I think, cost about 4 because once again, we're assuming that Goreclaw will be a 5/5 if it's able to attack, and this can add 2 mana, gain us life, and draw us cards all in the same spell. Trash the Town. This is an interesting piece of tech that I've discovered in OTJ. I look at this as a 2-mana spell most of the time, where we're using the third ability. Until end of turn, target creature gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw 2 cards. If you guys follow my channel, you know I'm a big fan of 2-mana draw 2 spells, and so Trash the Town is sort of the closest that we can get, other than Peerless Recycling in mono green. And so I really do like this pick at only 2 mana, and it can also give a creature trample if we need that as well, or buff it up just a little bit, but that is a bit expensive to put 2 1/1 counters on a creature for 2 mana. Up the Beanstalk, also a great cheap effect that will draw us a bunch of cards, and we are obviously in a deck with lots of mana value 5 or greater spells, and Voltborn Tyrant we already talked about. Okay, so that will take us to our removal package. So starting us off here with Hunter's Talent, which is a 2-mana bite spell, but we also have upside where later on in the game we can level it up to get its effect, and it is expensive. For a total of 6 additional mana, we get to level 3 at the beginning of your end step if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So a nice little emergency mode on this card. Kenrith's Transformation will ETB draw a card and lock a commander onto the battlefield for only 2 mana. I simply play this in every green deck. Kogla the Titan Ape will ETB fight a creature, and whenever it attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player control. So great versatile removal on Kogla. Molder Slug is a nice hate on artifact decks because at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact for 5 mana, and a 4/6 body is okay. I always want to be able to hate on artifact decks, and we are only running 1 artifact in this entire deck, so we are basically not affected by that. Myconid Spore Tender, 4 mana 4/1 when ETBs destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So I look at this as a 2 mana sorcery speed destruction effect, but it does trigger all of our creature synergies. This is possibly one of the weakest cards in the deck, so you might want to consider perhaps swapping this for something that's more of like a 3-for-1 or 4-for-1 type of effect. I've seen Druid of Purification in this type of slot before, but I like the fact that this is a 4/1 body, so it will trigger our Goreclaw synergies. Scion of Calamity, 5/5 Myriad body. When it deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls, so not bad. Scrap Shooter will ETB and destroy an artifact or enchantment if we gift a card, and this does get discounted because it's a 4/4 reach body. Silverback Elder is going to almost always destroy a target artifact or enchantment whenever we cast a creature spell. We can also look at the top 5 cards of our library and ramp out a land onto the battlefield tapped, and as an emergency mode, we can gain 4 life. Then we have Tailswipe, a 1-mana instant fight spell essentially, so just very cheap. This is sort of Green's version of Swords to Plowshares. I can't believe this spell is not run in more green decks, but this is simply the most efficient creature removal because we are going to be running a lot of big beefy boys, and so our stuff is never going to die when it fights. Wear Down is going to destroy 2 artifacts or enchantments if we gift a card, which we're almost always going to do for only 2 mana. Now that brings us to our protection category, starting with Legolas's Quick Reflexes. For only 1 mana, we can untap target creature, and until end of turn, it gains hexproof reach, and whenever the creature becomes tapped, it deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. Now, this spell in particular is missing the indestructible keyword. However, it can double as both a removal spell and a hexproof spell, which is very unique and definitely super cool tech at only 1 mana, and it does have split second and cannot be countered, which is absolutely amazing. Spinner of Souls is going to protect our board in case of a board wipe, because whenever another non-token creature we control dies, we reveal cards from the top until we reveal a creature, and that goes into our hand. Tamiyo's Safekeeping, 1 mana, basically save a permanent by giving it hexproof and indestructible, gain 2 life. Tyvar's Stand can double as both protection 99% of the time, but also a buff spell 1% of the time for X and a green. At instant speed, target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And Whisperwood Elemental, again, another effect here that protects us against board wipes. If we sacrifice it in response to a board wipe on the stack, until end of turn, face-up non-token creatures we control gain. When this creature dies, manifest the top card of your library, and it also makes creatures for us incidentally as well. This card is perfect to see right around turns 4 or turn 5 when we're going to be anticipating that first board wipe to come down. Real quick, we'll talk about Verdant Sun's Avatar, 7 mana 5/5. When it or another creature ETBs under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. If this thing sticks on the battlefield, you will gain lots and lots of life. In my 1 game testing this on Cockatrice at a power level 7 table, trample. This did gain me about 100 life. So this thing, again, I really like running anti-burn tech just sort of incidentally in my decks, just because there's so many decks out there rely on direct life loss in order to close out the game. All of the aristocrat strategies for not only creatures, but also artifact sacky types of decks, treasures with your marionette master type of effects. And then mono red burn is also very popular. You have your Dragon's Approach types of decks and all of that. So I really just like incidentally running life gain in order to survive the burn players. And then I believe we haven't yet touched on our overrun category. We are not running Crater Hoof in this particular category because I'm so tired of seeing it out in the wild. So I'm going to be the change we want to see. We are running Overwhelming Stampede. In place of that, Thunderfoot Baloth as well to give our creatures +2/+2 and trample. And then Zapandril will double the power and toughness of each creature we control at the beginning of each combat. Briefly, I will touch on the mana base as well. So we are able to run a lot of utility because we are in a monocolored mana base here. Abstergo Entertainment can exile graveyards and also draw us a historic card if we have one in our graveyard. Analyze the Pollen is basically like a tapped land because we can always pay 1 to search up a basic, and then if we play that as our landfall for the turn, then we actually end up with a tapped land and an untapped land, which is the same as playing a tapped land on its own. And the great thing about this spell is that we can also collect Evidence 8 if it's in the late game, we've been board wiped. We can just tutor up a regular creature and put that into our hand. Ancient Tomb can add 2 mana. Balagad Sanctuary will return cards from our graveyard to our hand if we don't need the land drop for the turn. Beseiju can get rid of artifacts and enchantments. Bridgeworks Battle is going to be a fight spell, also on an untapped land, which is pretty great. Bushwhack is simply one of the best green spells ever made. It's basically a removal spell on an MDFC because, again, if we pay the 1, search up a basic, that will cover our butt in the early game, and then we can always remove a creature in the late game if we need to as well. Castle Garenbrig will tap us for 2 mana as long as we are casting creature spells. Demolition Field to get rid of non-basic lands. Fabled Passage to, I guess, deck thin. Garden of Fraelis can actually help us to draw a bunch of cards with its spell side. When it ETBs, you may sack another creature. If you do, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. Generous Ent is, again, sort of like a tapped land because we can always force cycle it for 1, and it gets discounted by Goreclaw if we are in top deck mode and need a creature body on the battlefield. Guildless Commons is in here to draw a card as a bounce land. Mosswort Bridge can help us cast spells for free. Nykthos is going to be one of the best cards to tutor up with Archdruid's Charm or something like that because it will tap for our mana equal to our devotion to green. Prismatic Vista to deck thin. Reliquary Tower to prevent our max hand size. Scavenger Grounds to hit on graveyards. We're running 16 forests. Town Gates of Madara also can be a protection spell that can be searched up via Archdruid's Charm because up to 1 target creature will phase out on ETB. Temple of the False God because we are running a lot of land ramp. Turn Timber Serpentine Wood to help us in top deck mode. We can cast this to basically ramp out a creature from our library onto the battlefield. Then we have Urza's Cave, also can be sacked here by paying 3 and tapping it to ramp out any land from our deck onto the battlefield tapped. Then we have Yavimaya Hollow as just a little bit of regeneration protection. So that is my Goreclaw Terra of Qal Sisma deck. I'll be making a companion video where I will actually put this deck through its paces 2 or 3 times so you can see how the deck actually performs, and now we can assemble a lethal board state by about turn 7. So that is the deck tech, guys. If you want to see any of my other deck techs, those will be on screen now. As always, like a video and subscribe if you want to see more content from me, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.